The GPS said it was just another delivery to apartment 4B, but when Jessica Martinez pulled up to the address, she knew immediately that something was wrong. The building's tactical positioning, the vehicles parked with engines running, the way shadows moved behind curtains on the third floor, all of it screamed ambush to someone who'd spent 21 years reading urban terrain like a battlefield map. The food delivery app showed a $50 tip for Chinese takeout. But what the people inside that building didn't know was that their delivery driver had once extracted high-value assets from hostile territory across 4 continents. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this story resonates with you, please consider subscribing to hear more untold stories of those who've served in the shadows, protecting lives in ways that never make the evening news. Chicago's South Side looked different at night, transformed from a maze of residential streets into something that required the kind of situational awareness Jessica Martinez had developed during 2 decades of operating in the world's most dangerous cities. As she navigated her 10-year-old Honda Civic through neighborhoods where most delivery drivers refused to work after dark, she moved with the systematic precision of someone who understood that carelessness could be fatal. At 47, Jessica had perfected the art of invisibility that made her ideal for both her former profession and her current cover. Average height, unremarkable features, clothes that suggested economic necessity rather than choice. The thermal delivery bags in her back seat contained enough Chinese food to feed a small family, and her phone displayed the kind of delivery app interface that had become ubiquitous in the gig economy. To anyone watching, she was exactly what she appeared to be, another working-class woman trying to make ends meet through the endless hustle of modern American life. But appearances had been Jessica's specialty since she'd graduated from the Army's Special Operations Urban Warfare School 23 years ago and begun the career that would take her to places that didn't exist on any official map. 18 months ago, she'd been Master Sergeant Jessica Martinez, leader of Asset Extraction Team Delta 7, responsible for retrieving high-value personnel from hostile environments where traditional military operations would cause international incidents. Her team had operated in 14 countries across 5 continents, conducting missions that required equal parts tactical precision and diplomatic invisibility. The work had been everything she'd ever wanted: challenging, meaningful, and absolutely essential to national security. It had also cost her 2 marriages, most of her personal relationships, and finally her health when a mission in Somalia went sideways and left her with a bullet fragment in her shoulder that military surgeons couldn't completely remove. Mandatory medical retirement had felt like death. 21 years of service ended by a piece of metal the size of a pencil eraser that made her unsuitable for field operations but perfectly capable of civilian employment. So she'd moved to Chicago, chosen food delivery work for its flexibility and anonymity, and tried to learn how to be ordinary. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent decades perfecting the art of urban reconnaissance, studying city layouts and population patterns to identify extraction routes and safe houses. Now she used those same skills to optimize delivery routes and avoid traffic congestion. But some training runs deeper than career changes. And tonight, that training was telling her that the apartment building at 3247 South Halsted Street represented significantly more danger than a simple food delivery should involve. Jessica parked 2 blocks away from the target address and began her assessment. The building was a 3-story walk-up in a neighborhood that had seen better decades, the kind of structure that offered multiple entry and exit points along with excellent concealment for both defenders and attackers. More concerning were the tactical indicators that suggested this wasn't a normal residential location. 3 vehicles parked within 50 yards, all with engines running and positioned for rapid departure. Window coverings that prevented visual surveillance from outside but allowed observation of approaching threats, and the kind of foot traffic patterns that indicated either drug dealing or human trafficking. Jessica's delivery app showed apartment 4B as her destination, which meant 4th floor. But the building only had 3 stories, which meant either the app contained an error or someone was using a false address to lure delivery drivers to a specific location. Neither option suggested legitimate business practices. Jessica checked her concealed carry permit and the Glock 19 she kept hidden beneath her delivery jacket. She'd maintained her firearms qualifications despite retirement, partly from habit and partly from the understanding that some neighborhoods didn't respect the civilian status of former military personnel. But this situation felt different from random street crime. The tactical positioning and operational security suggested professional criminal activity with specific objectives and systematic methods. Jessica activated the personal safety app on her phone, the one that would alert emergency contacts if she didn't check in within predetermined intervals. Then she grabbed the Chinese food order and began walking toward what was almost certainly a trap. Because some instincts were stronger than common sense, and because the customer order included a note that had triggered every protective response she'd developed during 21 years of rescuing people from situations they couldn't escape alone. The note, buried in the special delivery instructions where most customers left gate codes or apartment numbers, contained just 4 words: "Help me, please hurry." Jessica had extracted enough assets from hostile territory to recognize genuine distress when she saw it. Someone in that building needed rescue, and the food delivery provided the perfect cover for an initial reconnaissance operation. She approached the building with the casual confidence of someone making a routine delivery, while simultaneously cataloging escape routes, threat positions, and tactical vulnerabilities that could be exploited if the situation escalated beyond surveillance. The front entrance was propped open with a brick, which allowed easy access but also suggested that whoever was inside expected people to be coming and going frequently. Jessica climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, noting the positions of security cameras and identifying the apartments that showed signs of recent activity. Apartment 3B had light coming from under the door, and the kind of muffled voices that suggested multiple occupants engaged in serious conversation. Jessica positioned herself where she could hear without being seen, and began the kind of intelligence gathering that had once been her specialty. What she heard made her blood freeze. "Next shipment arrives tomorrow night. 3 more girls from the truck stop. Buyers are getting impatient. Human trafficking. Professional operation with interstate connections and systematic victim acquisition." And somewhere in this building, someone had managed to place a food delivery order with a hidden plea for help. Jessica retreated to the stairwell and began planning an extraction operation that would have to be executed without backup, official authorization, or any of the resources she'd once taken for granted. But she had something that most rescue operations lacked: complete surprise, and an opponent who would never expect their food delivery driver to be someone who'd spent 21 years getting people out of places exactly like this. Time to remind herself why she'd been the best at what she did. Jessica descended to the 2nd floor and began systematic surveillance of the building's interior, using techniques she'd perfected in urban environments from Mogadishu to Kandahar. The layout was straightforward: 3 apartments per floor, central stairwell, no elevator, and fire escape access on the east side of the building. More importantly, she could identify the operational patterns that revealed how the human trafficking ring was using the space. Apartment 2A appeared to be a monitoring station. She could hear radio communications and see the glow of multiple computer screens through the gap under the door. Apartment 2B was being used for storage, based on the stacks of boxes visible through partially open blinds. And Apartment 2C showed no signs of activity, suggesting it might be empty or used for purposes that required isolation. The 3rd floor was where the management operations took place. Apartment 3A contained the administrative functions: money counting, communication with buyers, coordination of transportation logistics. Apartment 3B housed the security team, the men whose voices she'd heard discussing shipment schedules and victim acquisition, which meant Apartment 3C was most likely where the victims were being held. Jessica climbed back to the 3rd floor and positioned herself outside Apartment 3C, using her phone to mimic the behavior of a delivery driver trying to confirm an address while actually conducting audio surveillance of the interior. What she heard confirmed her assessment, multiple female voices speaking in languages she recognized as Eastern European, the sound of movement constrained by physical restraints, and the kind of subdued desperation that came from people who'd learned that resistance only made their situation worse. At least 4 victims, possibly more. Ages difficult to determine from voice analysis alone, but probably late teens to early 20s based on vocal patterns and the demographic preferences of most trafficking operations. Jessica's tactical assessment identified multiple complications that would make a traditional extraction extremely dangerous. The traffickers were armed, organized, and operating with the kind of professional discipline that suggested either law enforcement or military training. The building's layout provided limited escape routes, and any rescue operation would have to move multiple traumatized victims through hostile territory while under fire. Most critically, she was operating alone without backup, communication support, or legal authority. But Jessica had conducted successful extractions under worse conditions, and she had advantages that the traffickers couldn't anticipate. They expected delivery drivers to be vulnerable civilians, not former special operations personnel with 2 decades of urban warfare experience. She returned to her car and began assembling the equipment she'd need for what military tacticians called a dynamic entry operation with multiple asset recovery. The Honda Civic's trunk contained items that most food delivery drivers wouldn't carry: tactical flashlights, zip-tie restraints, a first aid kit designed for combat trauma, and communication equipment that could reach emergency services on frequencies that bypassed normal dispatch protocols. Jessica also had something that no amount of equipment could replace: the psychological profile of an opponent she'd fought many times before. Human traffickers operated on intimidation and control, using violence against helpless victims to maintain operational security. But they typically folded quickly when faced with organized resistance from someone who understood their methods and wasn't afraid of their threats. The key was speed, surprise, and overwhelming force applied at precisely the right moment. Jessica checked her watch: 11:47 p.m. Perfect timing for an operation that needed to happen when most of the neighborhood was asleep, but emergency services would still respond quickly to calls for assistance. She activated her emergency communication device, the one that would alert federal law enforcement to her location and situation if activated. But she set it for a 15-minute delay, which would give her time to execute the extraction before backup arrived to complicate the tactical situation. Then she grabbed the Chinese food order and returned to the building for what would either be a successful rescue operation or the end of her retirement from active service. Because some missions chose you, regardless of your official status or personal preferences, and Jessica Martinez had never failed to bring her people home. Chapter 3. The extraction. Jessica's approach to Apartment 3C was textbook urban warfare, systematic, silent, and designed to achieve maximum tactical surprise before the opposition could organize an effective response. She'd left the Chinese food in the stairwell. Maintaining her delivery driver cover was no longer the priority. The door to Apartment 3C was reinforced steel with multiple locks, which confirmed that it was being used to contain people against their will. But the reinforcement was designed to prevent escape from inside, not entry from outside by someone with Jessica's training and equipment. She used her tactical knife to defeat the doorframe's weak points, applying the lock-picking skills she'd learned during hostage rescue training at Fort Bragg 20 years ago. The process took 90 seconds, longer than she preferred, but fast enough to maintain operational surprise. Inside, the apartment had been converted into a holding facility with furniture removed and windows covered with blackout material. 4 young women, ages 19 to 23, were secured with zip-tie restraints and positioned where they could be monitored but not easily escape. Jessica assessed their physical condition rapidly: malnourished, exhausted, and showing signs of long-term psychological trauma, but mobile and capable of following instructions. None appeared to require immediate medical attention that would complicate evacuation. "I'm here to get you out," she said quietly in English, then repeated the message in Russian and what she hoped was passable Romanian. Stay calm, move quietly, and do exactly what I tell you. The women's responses revealed both hope and terror. They understood that rescue was happening, but they'd learned not to trust sudden changes in their circumstances. Jessica had seen the same reaction in hostages rescued from other hostile situations. American military, she added, knowing that her nationality might provide psychological reassurance. You're safe now. She began cutting their restraints with her tactical knife while listening for sounds from the adjacent apartments that would indicate the security team had detected her presence. So far, the operation was proceeding without alerting the traffickers to the breach. But Jessica knew that wouldn't last long. The longer they remained in the building, the higher the probability of detection and violent confrontation. Can everyone walk? She asked. All four women nodded, though their movements suggested weakness and disorientation. Jessica distributed small flashlights and positioned the women for movement. Follow me exactly. Stop when I stop, move when I move. If I tell you to run, go to the stairwell and down to the street level. Do not stop for anything. She opened the apartment door and checked the hallway. Clear, but she could hear increased activity from apartment 3B. That suggested the security team was preparing for some kind of operation. Time to move. Jessica led the women toward the stairwell, using hand signals to coordinate their movement while maintaining audio surveillance of potential threats. They reached the stairs without detection and began descending toward the exit. That's when the situation escalated. A door opened on the second floor and a man's voice called out in accented English, "Hey, who the hell are you?" Jessica pushed the women toward the first floor while turning to face the threat. The man emerging from apartment 2A was armed and clearly part of the trafficking operations security team. Food delivery, Jessica replied calmly, while calculating distances and response options. Got turned around looking for the right apartment. The man's expression suggested he wasn't buying the explanation. His hand moved toward the weapon concealed under his jacket. Jessica's response was immediate and decisive. 21 years of combat training compressed into 3 seconds of precise violence that left the trafficker unconscious on the floor and his weapon secured. But the confrontation had created noise that would alert the rest of the organization. Run. Jessica commanded the women, who were already moving toward the exit with the kind of desperate speed that came from understanding their lives depended on reaching safety. Jessica followed them down the stairs as doors began opening throughout the building and voices started shouting in multiple languages. The trafficking ring was mobilizing for pursuit, but they were several seconds behind and didn't yet understand what they were facing. The women reached the street level, and Jessica directed them toward her car, which was positioned for rapid departure. "Get in, stay low and trust me," she said while scanning for threats from the building they'd just evacuated. As the first trafficker appeared at the building's entrance, Jessica was already driving away with 4 rescued victims and enough evidence to put the entire operation in federal prison. Her emergency communication device activated automatically, sending location and situation updates to FBI field agents who would arrive within minutes to arrest anyone still in the building. But Jessica didn't wait for backup. She drove directly to the nearest police station, where she delivered 4 human trafficking victims and provided a detailed briefing on the criminal operation she'd just dismantled. Detective Maria Rodriguez, who processed the initial report, had seen enough unusual situations during 15 years with Chicago PD to recognize when something didn't fit normal patterns. "Ma'am," she said to Jessica, "most food delivery drivers don't conduct hostage rescue operations. Who exactly are you?" Jessica's answer was simple and honest: someone who couldn't drive away when people needed help. 3 hours later, FBI agents arrested 12 individuals connected to a human trafficking ring that had been operating across 4 states. The rescued women were placed in protective custody and provided with the resources they needed to rebuild their lives. And Jessica Martinez returned to food delivery work the next evening,
because some people were too dangerous to be allowed to remain in retirement when innocent lives were at stake. The delivery app still showed her rating as 4.8 stars out of 5, but the 4 women she'd rescued from apartment 3C would remember her as something much more important: the person who proved that help could arrive from the most unexpected places. 6 weeks later, Jessica received a package with no return address. Inside was a military commendation from a general whose name she recognized but who officially had no knowledge of her civilian activities. The citation read, "For extraordinary heroism in the performance of duties that exemplify the highest traditions of military service, even when such service is conducted outside official capacity." Jessica framed the commendation and hung it next to her delivery driver certification. Because some honors meant more than others, and some missions continued long after official service ended, her phone buzzed with another delivery request: Chinese food to an address on the north side. Jessica checked the special instructions and smiled when she saw only a gate code and apartment number. Just another normal delivery for someone who'd learned that normal was overrated anyway.